For those of you in cybersecurity, or for those of you who just buy cybersecurity products, there's a few companies that you've heard of. McAfee is one of them. I've always admired the company. I've got here the VP and CISO for that really iconic firm. We're going to talk a little bit about the CISO position, about trends in cyber, and kind of pick his brains on things that might be helpful to you either as a cybersecurity professional or a buyer of cybersecurity products. So I hope you stick around and watch our video. Hi everyone, this is Ed from TAG. Nice to see you all. Got a wonderful guest today, my friend Arve Kjoelen, who is the Chief Information Security Officer and also Vice President at one of the truly iconic firms in our industry, McAfee. Arve, well, welcome. You work at a place that's almost synonymous with cybersecurity, so thanks for jumping on. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ed. It's great to be here, and happy to be here to talk a little bit about what we do at McAfee. You know, here we're focused on securing the consumer, and that of course requires that we also operate securely. So happy to have a chance to talk about what it's like to be a Chief Information Security Officer at a security company.
Well, thank you for doing what you do. You guys have been protecting people for as long as I can remember, and I hope you continue to do it indefinitely. Now, as the Chief Information Security Officer at McAfee, I would imagine that you kind of play a dual role. You're both there protecting the company, but you also, because your company protects all of us, you have a little double kind of responsibility there, as if the job is not hard enough. So tell us a little bit about some of the day-to-day challenges.
Well, I think at a company like McAfee, the challenge is really keeping the company secure. If you look at it on a day-to-day basis, we just run a number of programs, so it's not very different from running other programs. But the main issue that you have as a CISO is you're always wondering whether you're doing enough. And so you're always wondering whether there's something that you overlooked or there's something else that you should be doing. So you have that concern and that desire to just be as complete as possible. What I find in technology is that, and I spent some time in financial services as well, is that the challenges can be a little bit different than in financial services. Financial services is highly regulated, technology not so much. And so you just have more questions and decisions that are up for grabs. So a lot more interaction with BU leaders about, is this the right thing to do or is it not the right thing to do?
You know, is regulatory an issue? You guys are a cybersecurity vendor. Do you, in some cases, inherit the regulatory requirements for customers? I know you're dealing primarily with consumers. I'm guessing it's probably not as intense as it might be in some other industries, but maybe I've got that wrong.
Yeah, I know. As a global company, of course, we have GDPR, we have a number of privacy regulations in other parts of the world. So that's a big part of what we need to pay attention to. As far as U.S. regulations, you know, we do have lighter regulations than many of the other industries, but you know, the FTC is a regulator that is interested in consumer companies.
I mean, recently, what you and I and everybody have been talking about are these changes at the SEC. I'm curious, what would be your advice to your peers and to anybody watching about kind of making sure that they are in good stead and that there wouldn't be any challenges? Because those new rules are tough. They're very I don't think they look that easy to do. I'm curious what you think and what maybe as you're talking to peers, what some of the conclusions are that you're coming to.
Yeah, maybe touching on a couple of things. So one is the new rules, and so those incident disclosure rules should be possible to implement as any company. I don't think it's easy to do. It's going to require some internal changes around the processes.
They look very difficult.
You think they look difficult? Yeah, I think you have to have a process, right, for being able to determine within the first few hours, is this an incident that has the potential to be material? So that's the key that you have to have a repeatable process for. And it probably even makes sense for companies to exercise that, right? Do you have the mechanism in place if there's something that happens on on a light holiday or on a weekend, are you going to be able to turn that around and file an 8K with the SEC? So that is one aspect. I think the other thing that we've seen the SEC do recently is the civil action against SolarWinds and against the CISO down at SolarWinds, and that action also I think contains a lot of learnings for CISOs.
One thing I always think about, Arve, you and I are both technologists. Whenever I see a time requirement, in this case, the 4-day time requirement, I always think automation. Like I think workflow and automation, because you and I are human beings, and we might be at a wedding or might be sick with the flu, or who knows what can happen when humans are involved in something. Do you think eventually this really becomes something that's solved with workflow? What are your thoughts on automation as a way to help you and I and others who do this?
Yeah, I do think automation can certainly help you. So one, it can help you document what is happening and make sure that you have the right evidence. So whether you decide to file or not, you can have all of that data readily available. I think even if you have automation, you will need to have some decision points, right? Just like you do with other resiliency related events. So what if your CISO is out? What if you're the person who would normally file is out? So you have to have each part of the organization that's going to be involved in the filing. You really need to make sure that you have a backup, you have a mechanism for continuing if someone is not available.
One thing I've been very critical of is the materiality piece, because I really do think that's an extremely difficult kind of call. Certainly for you and I, we're trained to deal with cryptography and architecture and zero trust and networks, and then this idea of determining materiality in the context of someone making an investment in the firm. Tell me what you think. I feel like that's a just fundamental mismatch between that requirement and kind of the CISO's responsibility day to day. I might have that wrong, but that's been my observation. I know I wouldn't be good at making a materiality call at any of the companies I've been associated with. What are your thoughts on materiality?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think as CISOs, we're not generally qualified to pronounce on materiality of incidents. I'm sure there are some incidents where it might be obvious, but
you get a sense
things can evolve over time.
We're good at, but materiality, we're just not trained or ever positioned to do that.
So I think there are a couple of risks that we run. So one is that just the SEC will be overloaded with filings, right? Because if you err on the side of this could be material, you could end up with just a large number of filings. And I think that's really just going to dilute the information that's available to the investors. If you have dozens of filings every quarter from each company that something happened that might be material, I think it's going to be hard as an investor to draw good conclusions from that.
We did some cartoons at TAG where we had basically all of us DDoSing the SEC with barrels of reports. Again, I don't mean that in a glib way. I simply mean that in the early days of an incident, there's usually a lot of confusion. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I know that the beginnings of incidents, by definition, are a mess. You're dealing with an adversary that's trying to make it a mess. That's the whole point, to make it a mess, and it takes time to sort it out. One thing that I think I've seen is that, and tell me what you think, in our industry, there's become this incentive for people to maybe be careful about the banter during an incident, like over text, and that gives me a real chill because I want my team to just speak freely. If somebody goes, you use the curse word, it's an S show. I mean, that's a typical text you would get from somebody on your team. And you as the CISO might say, well, hold on a second, and there might be all this crazy stuff going around. And then eventually you get a sense of it. But if after an incident, you've got people going back and reading those perhaps out of context, do you think it encourages security teams not to speak openly about what's going on for fear that maybe a text might be misinterpreted later? I worry about that.
So I think it could, perhaps in some organizations, but I think as a CISO, what you have to think about is it is your responsibility to make sure that these things get disclosed.
Yeah.
If something bad happened, if your team misbehaved during the incident, it's still your responsibility to make sure that that gets disclosed. And I actually think under these rules, it may be difficult for companies to line up their internal disclosure roles and responsibilities with the SEC's rules. So if that's a CISO, you are liable if something doesn't get disclosed on time. You need to be the one deciding whether something gets disclosed as well, or otherwise you have a mismatch between the regulations and how your company is set up.
And you and I are talking now in December of 23. I don't know what first quarter next year will look like in 24, but I do feel like if this is done right, then what you just described could result in a better state. Meaning, right now, I think you and I would both say the lawyers are not crazy about the idea of people like you and I saying, I'm just going to, I'm going to go contact the SEC tomorrow. That's not been the way this has worked. In some cases, that might even be like a whistleblower thing, if you don't have a process. So I know the lawyers don't like it, CEOs don't like it, CFOs don't like it, nobody likes it, CISOs don't even like it. But if the goal is, if the SEC's objective is to get the CISOs more involved, I have two observations I'm curious what you think. One is I feel like we need more training as executives on, more or less the broadness of risk and how cybersecurity vulnerability compares and rationalizes with other kinds of risk, pandemic risk and AI risk and so on. We definitely need that. And then second, we really do need, to your point, to exercise processes that are well understood, well known, that I believe have automation, so that when there is that discomfort, let's say you're on day 3.5, and you're pretty sure there's a problem and you think the lawyers are dragging their feet, we should have a button, a big red button we can push as part of the process that means, hey, this is going today. We have a deadline. I'm not going to let you drag your feet. This is going now. I feel like that's what is necessary. That's almost present nowhere. I don't know anybody who has that. So I'm hoping that the SEC gives people the benefit of the doubt here to get realigned. But am I saying anything that sounds incorrect? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, this is a really dynamic topic right now. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I think, it would be nice if we could get a little bit more specifics from the SEC for expectations in a situation like that, right? And I think when you talked about training earlier, I think guidance as well. I think there's a lack of legal guidance for CISOs right now, and so it may be difficult as a CISO to determine what is it that I need to do, what is it that I am responsible for, and how do I need to act in a crisis situation.
You may know this. I teach 2 semesters a year at NYU Law School, but partly for that reason. It's a group of very eclectic executives, lawyers, future lawyers that have come through our program for master's degree at NYU. And it's an interesting collage. I've been doing it for several years. I love the program, but I think your point is that, and I agree, is that legal and cyber do need to find some meeting point here, because I don't think we have that now. I think, for example, if you're Bob Smith, CISO for Acme Enterprise, and you decide to just go contact the SEC with something, dare I say you could get fired for that, right? in certain companies, I think you and I both know people who would say, I would never do that because I probably would get fired. It may not be true at McAfee. I doubt it would have been true, when I was working in telecom or banking or so on. I think that wouldn't have happened for me, but I know people who would think it would. Does that make sense? I mean, to be very nervous to just unilaterally go off and contact something as a CISO, that just sounds so uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think what you're saying makes sense, but I think if you're a CISO and you find yourself in that position, you're at a company that you probably shouldn't be at, right? Like there's something that is not working right in your company, whether that is governance or whether that's just roles and responsibilities. So I think
it's a tough message, right?
I think it's
envelopes, get another job.
I think in spite of, yes, easy to say, perhaps harder to act on, but I think in spite of even the conversation earlier around, the regulatory environment in tech and so on, the key determining factor is really like, what is the culture like? What does your immediate boss look like? What is board governance like? And so if you have, an active board with clear expectations, then you shouldn't find yourself in a position like that, or it should be clear to you that you may find yourself in a position like that, and then you need to do something about that. But I think what you don't want to do is be in a situation that doesn't feel right, and then just let that situation go until something happens. Because
The, the
it
nervous,
really is your problem too.
I mean, the nervousness I have is that you and I are good examples of people who, let's say there's a public company that had terrible cybersecurity, just complete mess. We would probably both consider it a challenge to go in and clean things up. I mean, it's fun to do that sort of thing in a career. After you've had some experience, the idea of, hey, we've got a mess here, come help us. I worry that before you or I would take a job like that, we might think, while we're cleaning this thing up, public company, let's say you make shoes or some dumb thing has nothing to do with tech, and you got 3 people on the cybersecurity company and the cybersecurity team. You got bad contracts with weak vendors, and the CEO says, "Come clean this up." That would be a very nervous scenario, like say for the first year while it's still a mess, because you can't flip a switch and fix things. Does that make sense? Like it's a spectacular disincentive to stepping into a public company that has a mess. As a new CISO, you could get yourself in trouble 1 month after joining the company, I guess. I don't know, but it seems like it could be it could be a problem.
So I'm going to take a little bit more of an optimistic view of that.
That's why you're here. That's why you're here.
I think if we look at what the FTC is doing, look at what the SEC is doing, look at the incident disclosure guidelines, I think we have enough information to act appropriately and do the things that you need to do, whether it's around disclosures or, some of the allegations against SolarWinds were around you're not investigating incidents aggressively enough, or, you're not doing anything about this particular risk. All of those are things that we should be doing. Now, in this new environment, I think we need to do it more diligently, make sure that we are not dropping things, and do it better than we ever have before. But I think if you do that, your legal risk should be substantially reduced.
Well, Arve, I hope you're getting nice big bonuses and pay increases at work, because I think that the job that any CISO is doing now has gotten tougher. Let's go on record as saying every CISO should get a raise. What do you think? Should we, that seems like maybe that's what we should call the title of our discussion. But I say that as a joke, but I also mean it. My observation is that the O in CISO, the officer, has been kind of small O, not big O. I mean, for example, at AT&T, I was an officer of the corporation, and that was a big deal. That meant you're speaking on behalf of the corporation. But I know a lot of people who are CISOs where it's not really officer. They're not in that room making decisions. They don't carry the same legal obligation. It's just a casual CISO title. And I think that's the change. I think the training has to change. I think compensation has to change. I also think legal protection for CISOs individually has to change. So I thank you for coming on. We should check back in 6 months. We'll have to see what happens in the next few months and whether we start seeing DDoSes at the SEC. That would be I guess an unintended consequence. So we'll see.
It's going to be interesting to see how companies react to the new disclosure rules and what that does to volume at the SEC. Definitely.
Well, good luck at your work at McAfee. Thanks for joining us. As always, wonderful to connect up, and we'll reconnect next year.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks for having me.
And for those of you watching, we'll see you all next time.